My stepmother tried to sell my childhood home, so I bought it at auction and gave her an hour to pack. The smell of my dad's old workshop still lingered in the garage when I walked through that house for what I thought would be the last time. 3 months had passed since his funeral, and my stepmother was already putting our family home up for sale. She'd moved in just 5 years ago when I was finishing college, but somehow she acted like this place belonged to her alone. The house where I'd spent 18 years of my life, where my real mom had planted roses in the front yard before cancer took her when I was 12, where Dad taught me to change oil in the driveway every Saturday morning. I remember standing in my childhood bedroom, looking at the faded marks on the wall where I'd measured my height every birthday. My stepmother had already started packing Dad's things into boxes, but she'd left all my stuff scattered around like it was garbage. My old baseball trophies were thrown in a corner, and she'd even taken down the family photos that included my real mom. It felt like she was trying to erase 23 years of memories just so she could cash out and move to Florida with her sister. The worst part was how she'd handled everything after Dad's death. She barely waited a week before she started talking about selling the house and moving away. When I asked if I could buy it from her, she laughed and said I couldn't afford it on my salary. She was probably right about that, but it still stung. Dad had always told me this house would stay in the family, that someday I'd raise my own kids here. But apparently his wishes didn't matter much to her. I tried reasoning with her for weeks, explaining how much the house meant to me, how it was the only connection I had left to both my parents. She just kept saying that life moves on, and I needed to accept that. Easy for her to say when she'd only lived there for 5 years. She didn't understand that every corner of that house held a memory. The kitchen where Mom taught me to make pancakes, the living room where Dad and I watched football every Sunday, the backyard where we had barbecues with all my friends from high school. When she finally listed the house with a real estate agent, I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. The asking price was way more than I could afford, even with the small inheritance Dad had left me. I watched helplessly as strangers walked through my childhood home, probably planning to tear down the garden shed where I'd spent countless hours building model airplanes with Dad. The whole situation felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. The house sat on the market for about 6 weeks without any serious offers. I guess the price was too high for most people, or maybe they could sense the tension between me and my stepmother whenever we were there during showings. I kept hoping it wouldn't sell, that maybe she'd change her mind and let me work out some kind of payment plan. But she seemed determined to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Then something unexpected happened that changed everything. The real estate agent called my stepmother with bad news. Apparently, there was some issue with the title that dated back to when my grandparents first bought the house in the 1960s. Some kind of legal complication that meant the house couldn't be sold through normal channels. The agent explained that it would have to go to auction instead, and that could take months to sort out. My stepmother was furious about the delay, but I saw it as a sign. Maybe Dad was looking out for me from wherever he was. The auction would level the playing field somehow, though I still didn't know how I'd come up with enough money to actually bid on the house. But at least it gave me time to figure something out, time to maybe find a way to save the place that meant everything to me. I spent the next few weeks researching everything I could about property auctions. I learned that sometimes houses go for much less than their market value, especially if there aren't many bidders. But I also learned that you need to have cash or certified funds ready on the day of the auction. My inheritance plus my savings would give me maybe half of what the house was worth, but I decided to try anyway. The night before the auction, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. What if there were multiple bidders? What if the starting price was already more than I could afford? What if my stepmother somehow found a way to stop the auction? I must have gotten up a dozen times to check my bank account balance, as if the numbers would somehow change overnight. The auction was held on a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. I arrived early and was surprised to see that there weren't many people there. Maybe a dozen potential bidders, plus a handful of real estate agents and lawyers. My stepmother showed up about 10 minutes before the auction started, giving me a look that could have melted steel. She clearly wasn't happy to see me there, but there was nothing she could do about it. When they called out the address of my childhood home, my heart started racing. The auctioneer explained the situation with the title and said the sale would be final, no contingencies. The starting bid was set at about 60% of the original listing price, which was still more than I had, but not impossibly more. I raised my hand and made the first bid, surprising myself with how confident I sounded. For the next few minutes, it was just me and one other bidder going back and forth. Some investor type in an expensive suit who probably wanted to flip the house. Each time he raised the bid, I countered, even though I was getting close to my limit. My stepmother watched with growing alarm as she realized I might actually be able to afford this. The look on her face was a mixture of anger and disbelief. Finally, the investor reached his limit and stopped bidding. The auctioneer called out my final bid once, twice, and then banged his gavel. I had ones. I actually owned my childhood home. The whole process took maybe 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. My hands were shaking as I signed the paperwork and handed over the certified check. My stepmother approached me as I was finishing up with the legal documents. She was trying to act calm, but I could see the panic in her eyes. She asked me what I planned to do about her stuff, all the furniture and personal items she'd accumulated over the years. I told her she had until the end of the week to remove everything that belonged to her, but that anything of Dad's stays in the house. She started arguing, saying she had rights as his widow, that she couldn't possibly move everything in a few days. But I'd already talked to the lawyer handling the auction, and legally, she was just a tenant now. The house was mine, and I could set whatever terms I wanted for her departure. I tried to be fair about it, giving her a full week to pack up and find a new place. But she kept pushing, demanding more time, more concessions. That's when I discovered something that changed everything again. While going through Dad's old desk to make sure she hadn't taken anything important, I found a folder hidden in the back of the bottom drawer. Inside were bank statements and financial records that I'd never seen before. Apparently, my stepmother had been slowly draining Dad's accounts for months before he died, transferring money to her own savings account. The amounts were staggering. She'd taken nearly everything, leaving just enough to cover his medical bills and funeral expenses. The inheritance she'd told me about, the small amount I'd received, was actually just a tiny fraction of what Dad had really left behind. She'd stolen the rest, probably planning to take it with her to Florida, along with whatever she got from selling the house. I sat in Dad's old chair, looking at these documents, feeling a rage I'd never experienced before. This woman had not only tried to steal my childhood home, but she'd also robbed me of my actual inheritance. Money that Dad had worked his whole life to save, money that was supposed to help me build my own future. She'd taken it all while pretending to be the grieving widow. I called my lawyer immediately and explained the situation. He said it would be difficult to prove fraud after the fact, but that we could definitely freeze her assets and start an investigation. The bank statements were pretty damning evidence, especially since she'd made the transfers while Dad was in the hospital, too weak to monitor his accounts properly. When I confronted her about it that evening, she didn't even try to deny it. She just said that Dad had given her access to his accounts, that she was entitled to the money as his wife. But the timing of the transfers told a different story. She'd been systematically stealing from him for months, probably planning her exit strategy long before he actually died. That's when I made my decision. I told her she had exactly 1 hour to pack whatever would fit in her car and leave. Not a week, not a few days, but 60 minutes. She could take her clothes and personal items, but everything else stayed in the house until we sorted out this financial mess. She started crying, saying I was being cruel, that she had nowhere to go. But I was done being sympathetic. This woman had manipulated my dying father, stolen his money, and tried to sell the house that represented my entire childhood. She'd shown no mercy to me or to Dad's memory, so why should I show any to her? I stood by the front door with my phone, timing her as she frantically threw things into suitcases. She kept trying to take things that belonged to Dad, claiming they were gifts he'd given her. I had to watch her like a hawk, checking every box and bag to make sure she wasn't stealing anything else. At one point, she tried to take my mother's jewelry box, saying Dad had promised it to her. That's when I almost lost it completely, but I managed to stay calm and just removed the jewelry box from her hands. The hour went by faster than I expected. She was still trying to pack when I told her time was up. She begged for just a few more minutes, but I was firm. I walked her to her car, watched her drive away, then went back inside and changed all the locks. The house was finally mine, really mine, and she was gone forever. Over the next few weeks, my lawyer worked with the bank to trace all the missing money. It turned out she'd transferred even more than I'd initially discovered, hiding it in multiple accounts. The total amount was enough to pay off the mortgage on the house and still have money left over for renovations. Justice felt sweet, but it also felt hollow. I would have traded all that money to have my dad back, to have him see me finally standing up for myself. The legal process took months to resolve, but eventually, most of the money was recovered. My stepmother had to pay back everything she'd stolen, plus penalties and legal fees. She tried to claim hardship, saying she couldn't afford to pay it all back, but the court wasn't sympathetic. She ended up having to sell her car and jewelry to cover the debt. I never saw her again after that day. I gave her an hour to pack. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she moved in with her sister in Florida, just like she'd originally planned. Apparently, she tells people that I stole her house and ruined her life. But I know the truth, and more importantly, I know that Dad would be proud of how I handled everything. Living in the house again has been strange but wonderful. I've been slowly renovating it, trying to restore it to how it looked when I was a kid. I found some of Mom's old paint colors in the basement and redid the kitchen in the same shade of yellow she'd chosen. I fixed the creaky floorboard in the hallway that Dad never got around to repairing. Every small improvement feels like I'm honoring both of their memories. The garden has been my biggest project. Mom's roses had been neglected for years, but I've been nursing them back to health. I planted new varieties alongside the old ones, creating a memorial garden that celebrates both of my parents. Neighbors often stop by to compliment the flowers and share their own memories of Mom and Dad. It feels like the house is alive again, full of the love and warmth that made it a real home. Sometimes I sit in Dad's old chair in the living room and think about how different things could have been. If I hadn't found those bank statements, if I hadn't been able to buy the house at auction, if I hadn't stood up to my stepmother when it mattered most. But everything worked out exactly as it should have. The house is where it belongs, with someone who truly loves it and understands its value beyond just dollars and cents. The whole experience taught me something important about family and loyalty. Blood doesn't always make you family, and marriage doesn't automatically give you the right to someone else's legacy. Real family is about love, respect, and shared memories. It's about understanding that some things are priceless and worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. I still get angry sometimes when I think about what my stepmother did, how she tried to erase my parents' memory and steal my inheritance. But mostly I feel grateful that I was able to save the house and preserve the legacy my parents built together. Every morning when I wake up in my childhood bedroom, I'm reminded that sometimes the good guys really do win, even when it takes a while to happen. The house is mine now, truly and completely mine. And someday, when I have kids of my own, I'll teach them to measure their height on the same wall where my dad measured mine. I'll show them how to change oil in the same driveway where he taught me. I'll tell them stories about their grandparents and great-grandparents, keeping the family history alive for another generation. That's what home really means. It's not just a building or a piece of property. It's the foundation of who you are, the place where your story begins and your values take root. My stepmother never understood that, but I do. And I'll make sure this house continues to be a real home for as long as I live here.